gather on in. We're all friends today. Hopefully everybody's showered and stinks. Good. All right. Now, first off, if you look closely at the columns on the skate, you'll see a lot of white spots. Those are the bullet and shrapnel holes that have been filled in. Those were, of course, inflicted on this skate in the Second World War. Keep your eyes open on the tour today. You see a lot of buildings in Berlin that still bear the scars and reminders of that particular conflict. If you see one that you're not certain of, you think it might be a World War II building, you can kind of point it out, and I'll let you know if it is, and then we can show it to the rest of the group. Kind of like a Where's Waldo of destroyed buildings in Berlin. So do keep an eye out. Now the next thing to do is talk history. So we've got 800 years of history to look at. We want to get that out of the way as quickly as possible. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start our story off by going back in time. We're going to go back to the year 1237. That is when our story begins. Back in 1237 is the first mention of Berlin. Now back then, Berlin was not a city. It was a small Slavic fishing village located right here on the River Spree. In the Slavic language, the name Berl, or Berlin, means swamp or bog. Therefore, Berlin is built on top of a massive underground swamp. So when we're walking around today, it smells real bad. Do not panic. It is not the guy or girl next to you, and it definitely is not your tour guide. It is a swamp below the city. Berlin stays a small, swampy fishing village to about the year 1420. 1420, a group of Christian knights known as the Hohenzollerns from the south of Germany take charge of the north of Germany in the name of the Holy Roman Empire. When they do this, they begin to tax the people, to build an army, to conquer territory, tax all of those people, build a larger army, conquer even more territory. By 1701, they have conquered so much territory that they decide to create a new country, a country that becomes known as Prussia. Now, at the height of its power, Prussia was much larger than today's modern-day Germany. Prussia took up the whole north of Germany, went up the Baltic coast up to Russia, and then back down to today's Czech Republic. Very large and powerful nation here on the continent of Europe. Now, the modern-day history of Germany, of Berlin, and of the German people does not officially begin until the year 1871. In 1871, the German states are unified because in 1871, those Prussians defeat their three toughest enemies in a war that becomes known as the Franco-Prussian War. In that war, they defeat the Austrians, the French, and the Danes. You take a look down the street here, you see a column with a gold angel on it. That is the Siegessäule, or the victory column. That is there to commemorate those victories in the Franco-Prussian War, and essentially to commemorate the birth of the German nation, and of the German people. Now, after getting their three toughest enemies out of the way, Prussia says, you know what? We are unstoppable. What are we waiting around for? We've got enough power. Why don't we just take on the rest of Europe? Then we'll come back to Berlin, we'll relax a little bit, then we'll take on the rest of the world. Now, before they can do this, there are two very important kingdoms in the south of Germany. Kingdoms known as Bavaria and Saxony. Very, very wealthy places. Anybody trying to build up an army, trying to conquer the rest of Europe is going to want hold of Bavaria and Saxony. Now, the Bavarians and the Saxons at this point in history have not yet been conquered by Prussia. They're aware of what Prussia is doing. They know how powerful Prussia is becoming, and they think, all right, guys, hey, if we don't do something soon, Prussia's going to send its armies down here and try to take us by force. So what we should do is we should have a meeting with the King of Prussia to show him that we should all just be friends and get along. Turns out the Bavarians, the Saxons, they have a meeting with the King of Prussia. And in this meeting, they say, King, come on, man, seriously. Why should we fight? We got so much in common. I mean, one, we all speak the same Germanic language, which means we can kind of understand each other. Two, we all drink beer, and tons of it. And three, we all love something delicious called Die Schnitzel. Now, if that doesn't say I love you and let's be best friends, I don't know what does. In fact, they say, King, come on, seriously. Why don't you take Bavaria, take Saxony, make it part of Prussia. You gain two territories without fighting a soul. King says, okay, no problem, I'll happily do that. But when I do, I'm no longer just a king. I am now the Kaiser, or the Emperor, of the new Prussian Empire. With Bavaria and Saxony becoming part of Prussia, that leads to the creation of the Prussian Empire. Now, after getting their three toughest enemies out of the way years and years earlier, now they're gaining territories without having to fight anybody. Prussia says, you know what, we are unstoppable. Let's take on the rest of Europe right here and now. This all culminates in 1914. 1914, we see the beginning of the Great War, or World War I. In the beginning of that war, the Kaiser had told the Prussian German people, he'd said, hey, support me in this war, because all it's going to take is 40 days. 40 days is all we need to wipe out the rest of Europe, then we'll be back in Berlin, relax a little bit, then we'll go take on the rest of the world. Now, history has shown us that World War I lasts not longer than 40 days, because 4 years later, they're still fighting. After 4 years of fighting, the government here in Berlin decides, no. Kaiser, you lied to us. We didn't want this war in the first place. Now it is going on and on and on for years that we never even imagined. We no longer want this war. So what the government here in Berlin decides to do is bring the war to a close. Behind the Kaiser's back, the government in this city signs a ceasefire with the Allies, a ceasefire that effectively ends World War I. In that ceasefire, the Germans, as they are now called, were forced to sign a very important document, a document known as the Treaty of Versailles. Now, the Treaty of Versailles stated a few things that Germany must now do. One, the Kaiser, he's been kicked from power. No longer will Germany have a monarch running this country, okay? Two, Germany must become a democracy. Well, that's fantastic. We all love democracy. Seems like a great idea. Three, Germany must take all of the blame for World War I, meaning they pay back each and every one of those allies monthly installments of gold that will take them until 1988 to pay back. It is only 1918. Germans are trying to figure out democracy, trying to pay off this debt. Things are just going to absolute chaos until two guys in the government decide, hey, you know what? We got problems. You know what the big problem is? This debt. If we can get this debt out of the way really, really fast, then this will all go away. Now, what's the best way to do that? You guys decide, well, why don't we just print tons and tons and tons and tons of money? We'll hand it out to the Allies. That'll get this debt out of the way in what, like 2, 3, 4, 5 days at the most? High five, man, that is an excellent plan. Now, history has shown us that these two guys were not economists, because an economist would tell you when you print money, that creates inflation. You print a lot of money very quickly, that creates hyperinflation, making your currency valueless. Give you an idea of how valueless German Reichsmark was at the time. 1919, $1 in Berlin would have gotten you 4 Reichsmarks. That's pretty good, it's not too bad. A few years go by, 1923, Christmas time rolls around, hyperinflation is at its height. Because $1 in Berlin in 1923 would have gotten you 4.2 trillion Reichsmarks. Stuff's absolutely useless. You have notes like this long with all the zeros on them. Stuff isn't worth anything. You wallpaper your house with Reichsmarks. You roll a cigarette with it. You do whatever you want with it except for spend it because the currency is worth nothing. Times are very hard here in Germany, especially here in Berlin. Luckily for the Germans, the Americans say, hey, you know what? We had our economy and our democracy figured out. We're going to help you guys out. Supported by the Americans, Germany goes through a golden age. Age known as the Golden 20s. Enlightenment, industry, everything is looking better, not just in Berlin, but across the German nation. Everyone seems to be happy.